She ruined the entire night just to make herself look important. Except, I was the one who got slapped in front of everyone for answering a question about my job. I'm Callie Maddox. I'm 29, a pediatric nurse, and 3 months ago my husband tried to humiliate me in front of his boss. What he didn't know was that my father, a retired colonel, had already declared war. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's begin. The sound of skin on skin cracked through the air like a whip. My cheek stung. I tasted blood, and all I could hear was laughter. Not mine, never mine. Eloise's laughter, sharp, satisfied, unfiltered. Her wineglass tilted in her hand as she chuckled from the velvet armchair like a queen watching a peasant get flogged. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with smugness, about time someone reminded her who she is. Or who she's not. Kinsley added from her corner of the couch, curled up in faux elegance, with one leg tucked under her. Her French manicured nails drummed lightly on her phone as she smirked. "Honestly, Callie, you walk around here like you matter." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth had gone dry, and the inside of it was already swelling where my teeth had dug into it. I tasted blood and salt and regret. Nolan stood above me, slowly flexing his fingers like he was working out the tension from a workout, not from striking his wife across the face. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He never really looked at me when he hit. He looked past me like I was some malfunctioning piece of furniture, not broken, just annoying. "Maybe now you'll think twice before speaking out of turn," he muttered, smoothing his tie like he was prepping for a courtroom argument. "You humiliated me in front of Braxton. You made me look like I can't control my own house." Control. That word echoed in my head like a locked door. It had always been about control. When I cooked his favorite meals, when I canceled my night shifts at the hospital for his meetings, when I laughed too loud when I didn't laugh enough. It all came back to whether I could be molded into something that made him look better. "You embarrassed me," he said again, like it was a closing argument. Case closed. Gavel dropped. I stood there, hand on my cheek, the sting blooming into something that pulsed with heat and memory. 3 years of this. 3 years of being slowly erased piece by piece. I should have said something. I should have screamed. But silence had been trained into me like muscle memory. Even now I felt my lips pressed together to hold back the scream clawing its way up my throat. No one moved to help me. Eloise lifted her wineglass to her lips, completely at ease. Kinsley reached for a throw pillow like she was settling in for a reality show episode. No one noticed the sound of the front door opening. No one but me. My heart stuttered, confused, unsure if it was hope or fear that made it skip. The door clicked shut. There were footsteps, measured, confident, deliberate, crossing the marble entryway. Too heavy to be a guest. Too even to be a panic. I turned. He stood there in the archway between the foyer and the living room, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the air. My father, Colonel Thaddeus Maddox, in full civilian dress, dark slacks, military-cut jacket, and posture, like the world saluted him just for breathing. His steel-gray eyes swept across the room with the calm of a battlefield commander surveying damage. First my face, then Nolan's hand, then the expressions frozen on the other 2 women like they'd been caught naked in public. Flanking him stood 2 men, tall, broad, unblinking. Both wore simple black jackets and boots with the quiet menace of men who'd seen war and decided nothing surprised them anymore. Their eyes scanned the room without speaking, standing just far enough behind my father to let him remain the focal point. Eloise's smirk evaporated. Kinsley dropped her phone. Nolan's smug confidence cracked ever so slightly. "Colonel Maddox," he said, voice too thin, too fast. What are you doing here?" Dad didn't answer him. He looked at me. "Just me. Callie," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Are you hurt?" My hand was still pressed against my cheek. I could feel it swelling. The copper tang of blood hadn't gone away. But what hurt more was the silence from the people who were supposed to care. I nodded slowly. "I'm okay." "No," he said, not breaking eye contact with Nolan. You're not. But you will be. Nolan shifted his weight like a man who just realized he'd stepped onto a trap door. This isn't what it looks like. We had an argument. Callie. She raised her voice during dinner. And she raised her voice. My father repeated his tone as still as winter ice. He turned to one of the men beside him. Detective Hanley, what did you observe when we walked in? Sir, the man replied, stepping forward. Observed subject male 6 foot standing over female hand raised. Female displayed visible facial trauma. Secondary subjects 2 females appeared to be mocking the injured party. No intervention attempted. My father nodded once his jaw tight. So we have assault, multiple witnesses, and a history of emotional abuse. History. Nolan choked. This is a misunderstanding. You can't just come in here, I can. Dad said calmly, stepping into the room because I've spent 30 years learning how to identify a threat, and I taught people how to deal with them. He turned back toward the 2 men. Gentlemen, he said, voice sharp, clear, and final. I believe we've found our target. Don't mess this up, Callie. That was Nolan's greeting as I garnished his boss's favorite appetizer, caramelized onion tarts I'd made from scratch because apparently store-bought was for wives who didn't care enough. He hovered in the doorway, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Braxton's going to be here at 6 sharp. This dinner is everything. I didn't respond. My hands were steady as I placed each tart on a clean white tray, spacing them evenly like Eloise had taught me. Well taught wasn't the right word. Corrected. That was her language. I'd learned quickly that the Brennan women didn't teach, they supervised. You didn't drizzle the balsamic, she snapped from the dining room, and the napkin folds are crooked again. Honestly, Callie, it's not that complicated. I bit the inside of my cheek and kept working. The balsamic was already on the counter. I reached for it without looking, lips pressed together so tightly I felt my jaw pop. Eloise swept into the kitchen like royalty forced to tour the servants' quarters. Her heels clicked against the marble tile, perfectly coordinated with her cream silk blouse and soft pink lipstick that somehow never smudged, no matter how much venom passed through it. She took one look at the tarts and clicked her tongue. Too small. Braxton's wife is petite, but she's not a bird. And those flowers you chose for the centerpiece, far too tall. They'll block eye contact. They're hydrangeas, I murmured, barely above a whisper. You said you liked hydrangeas. I like them in the right setting, she snapped, not towering like a jungle canopy. From behind me, I heard a faint snort of laughter. Kinsley curled up on the kitchen stool, twirling a strand of platinum hair around her finger. You should let Mom just handle the aesthetic. No offense, Callie, but your style is very practical. I didn't bother replying. I'd learned the hard way that responses only invited escalation. The safest place was silence. That dress, by the way, Eloise said, eyeing me up and down. Is it from Target again? I stiffened. It's just... She continued, voice syrupy sweet, when Nolan's future is on the line. I'd think you'd want to present yourself, aspirationally. Nolan walked over, adjusting his cufflinks with one hand and placing the other lightly on my shoulder. To anyone else, it might have looked like affection. I felt the pressure behind the touch, just enough to remind me I was being watched. You know how important tonight is, he said quietly, too close to my ear. Just smile and keep things on track, okay? No improvising. Got it, I whispered. He smiled, pressed a brief kiss to my cheek, and walked away, already turning his attention to his phone. Kinsley leaned toward me as he disappeared into the other room. You're lucky you know, she said, dropping her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. Nolan's the total package. Most guys wouldn't let their wife work in a hospital. I blinked. You mean, have a job? She shrugged. Sure. I mean scrubs and IVs and sick people. It's just not very elegant. My fingers clenched around the tray, but I kept my face neutral. Eloise reappeared in the doorway. Hydrangeas gone. Napkins refolded. You can salvage the tarts if you replate. And for heaven's sake, Callie put on some lipstick. I should have said something. I should have told them that I'd spent my entire day off preparing for this dinner, that I'd cleaned every inch of the house, cooked every dish by hand, arranged flowers and ironed linens, not because I wanted to impress Mr. Braxton, but because I'd once believed doing all of this meant I was part of the family, that if I tried hard enough, they'd finally see me. Instead, I wiped my hands, picked up the lipstick from the hallway table, and went upstairs without a word. In our bedroom, I stared at my reflection. The dress wasn't from Target. It was from a boutique in town I loved, one of the only things I'd bought for myself in months. It was soft green and hugged my waist in a way that made me feel comfortable. Not glamorous, but me. That was the problem. Nothing about me fit here. Nolan's world was white tablecloths and legacy donors and club memberships. Eloise's world was curated down to the wine labels. Kinsley's world was curated selfies and aesthetic brunches. And me. My world was night shifts, warm blankets, the quiet beeping of monitors, and the smell of apple juice and antiseptic. When I came back downstairs, the table was already being reset. The hydrangeas were gone, replaced by some low-profile orchid arrangement. The place cards had been moved. Eloise was correcting my salad fork for the third time. No, she said. The Waterford crystal goes on the right. Have I not told you this before? You've told me, I replied softly, repositioning it again. She gave a tight smile. Well, perhaps this time you'll remember. As I returned to the kitchen and plated the tarts again, I felt something shift. Something subtle, like a thread snapping in a sweater you didn't know was unraveling. I glanced around the gleaming curated kitchen. I saw my reflection in the glass of the microwave, the tension in my shoulders, the lipstick I didn't choose, the dress I'd started to love and now hated. I'd traded my comfort for their approval, and they'd never even noticed. As I placed the last tart on the silver tray, a chill climbed my spine. I don't belong in this house. I never have. He used to call me his safe place. Now I felt like a stranger in our own kitchen. I remember the way he looked at me the night we danced our first dance, slow, deliberate, like the rest of the world had disappeared. You ground me, he'd whispered. You make everything else feel simple. And I'd believed him. Completely. I thought we were building something rare. Our wedding had been nothing short of magical. Candlelight flickered over gold-rimmed glasses, white roses lined the aisle, and a string quartet played the song I told Nolan I'd loved since college. I wore a gown that made me feel like a queen. And when I looked into Nolan's eyes as he said I do, I saw everything I'd ever wanted reflected back at me. Dad walked me down the aisle in his dress blues, his chest decorated with service medals that sparkled in the sunlight. He kept his arms steady, but I could feel the emotion in the way his fingers curled just slightly around mine. Before he handed me over, he leaned in and whispered, "It's not what a man says in public that matters, sweetheart. It's how he treats you when no one else is looking." I'd laughed quietly, brushing him off. "You don't have to worry, Dad. Nolan adores me." He gave me a look then, a slow, thoughtful nod that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't understand it at the time. I do now. Back then, Nolan did adore me. Or at least he made sure I believed he did. He brought me coffee in bed, left notes on the bathroom mirror, told his friends that I was the smartest woman he'd ever met. He talked about our future with enthusiasm, our first house kids' vacations, Sunday dinners. He talked like someone who meant every word. And I wanted to believe every syllable. But adoration isn't the same thing as love, and it definitely isn't the same thing as respect. The first crack came 6 months in. We were in our new kitchen, his dream kitchen in the house Eloise had helped us pick. Granite countertops, subway tile, backsplash, gas stove. Nolan never used. I stood near the fridge unpacking groceries from brown paper bags, humming without realizing it. It was a Sunday. We were supposed to go for a walk after I got back from the store. Nolan was at the kitchen island scrolling through his laptop, wearing the hoodie he always wore when reviewing briefs. I thought everything was fine, until it wasn't. You spent $80, he asked, holding the receipt like it was evidence in a trial. I turned confused. Yeah, I picked up the steaks you like, and the wine you said Sharon Braxton mentioned last week. His jaw tightened. We're not made of money, Callie. I what? You can't just go throwing things into the cart like we're millionaires. Do you even think about budgeting before you shop? I blinked. It's not like I bought caviar. It's food for the week. That's not the point. His voice was rising now, frustration coloring every syllable. It's the principle. I'm working my ass off so we can have a future, and you're out here spending like a college student on payday. I stared at him. This man, my husband, was tearing into me over groceries. Not because we were struggling, not because we couldn't afford it, but because I'd spent money without asking. That was the real sin. I'll be more careful next time, I said, finally my voice quiet, even though something sharp twisted in my stomach. His tone softened immediately like a switch had been flipped. He closed the laptop and walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. I didn't mean to get upset. I'm just stressed. There's a lot riding on this quarter. You get it right? I nodded. I always nodded. That's how it started. Little moments like that. Apologies that came with just enough affection to make me doubt my discomfort. Criticism dressed up as concern. Maybe this blouse isn't the best fit for the firm dinner. Let's not talk about work stuff tonight, it's been a long day. You know I'd never control you, I just want what's best for us. I told myself it was just pressure. Just Nolan being high-achieving. That it was temporary. That all couples go through this. I buried the memory of the grocery fight. Pretended it was a one-off. We went on our walk that day just like we planned. He held my hand. Smiled like nothing had happened. But something had. A seed had been planted. And it grew in silence. Over time, it was no longer about money. It was about how long I stayed at work. About how I phrased things at dinner with his colleagues. About which friends I kept in touch with. About how often I called my dad. Every choice I made was met with a comment, a question, a suggestion cloaked in expectation. And I adjusted. That's what wives do. Right, adjust. Support. Compromise. But the person I was, the woman my father had raised to lead to trust. Her instincts to speak her mind, she was slowly disappearing. In her place was someone smaller, someone quieter, someone who stood in her own kitchen garnishing appetizers she didn't even like, hoping that if she smiled enough, followed the rules, and made herself useful, she might finally be seen again. Looking back, I realize it was never about the money. It was about control. I came home from a 12-hour shift, my legs aching, my scrubs smelling faintly of antiseptic and apple juice, to find my grandmother's quilt stuffed in a garbage bag by the door. At first, I didn't even register what it was. The bag was knotted, tightly propped neatly against the base of the staircase like a package waiting to be returned. I stepped over it on autopilot, balancing a takeout container in one hand and my work bag in the other. I had just enough energy left to fantasize about collapsing into bed and letting sleep numb everything. Then I noticed the corner of fabric peeking through the top of the bag. Blue and cream, floral stitching, a tiny patch near the edge in the shape of a robin where my grandmother had repaired a tear with love and a story. My heart slammed into my chest. I dropped everything and ripped the bag open. There it was, folded, crushed, and discarded like old towels. My grandmother's quilt. The only piece of home I'd brought with me into this marriage. The one item no one had been allowed to touch. I'd told them that, told her that. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I couldn't even cry. I just stood there holding it, waiting for the walls to make sense again. "Oh, good, you're home," Eloise's voice called from upstairs. She sounded cheery, accomplished, like she'd just finished a project and wanted to be praised. I didn't answer. I walked up the stairs slowly, quilt in hand, heart thudding like it knew something I didn't want to admit. Our bedroom door was wide open. The room beyond it was unrecognizable, Gone was the soft bedding I'd picked out on a budget before we got married. Gone were the mismatched lamps. I loved the little jewelry dish my college roommate had given me, the dusty bookshelf holding my dog-eared nursing textbooks and a few second-hand novels I still hadn't finished. In their place, cream and gray designer pillows, pristine nightstands with no drawer handles, a bed that looked like it belonged in a showroom. All neutral, all cold, all hers. Eloise turned toward me, beaming. "Isn't it stunning I didn't speak? I had the decorators in this afternoon. It was a bit last minute, but I just had the most wonderful vision while you were at work." She stepped forward, smoothing a corner of the new bedspread. "I told Nolan weeks ago that the room needed an upgrade. Too many sentimental touches." My arms wrapped instinctively around the quilt, crumpled and wrinkled in my hands. "Where's my stuff?" "Oh, it's been boxed up. Don't worry, it's all safe. Except that quilt, of course. It was falling apart. I told the maid to toss it." My throat tightened. "That was my grandmother's." She blinked. She made it when I was born?" "Every stitch. It survived the Great Depression. World War II. My mom's childhood. Mine." Eloise tilted her head, clearly unmoved. "Callie, darling, I understand your attachment, but look at this space now. It reflects Nolan's status, his sophistication. Don't you want your home to reflect who you're married to?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the quilt across the room and watch the careful symmetry of her showroom explode. But I didn't. I didn't even flinch. Because somewhere deep down I realized she was right. This room, this house reflected exactly who I was married to, and who I wasn't. That night, Nolan came home while I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the quilt in my lap. I hadn't unpacked the takeout. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't moved in over an hour. He walked in, loosened his tie, kissed the top of my head like nothing was wrong. "Place looks amazing. Right, Mom's decorators are worth every penny." I didn't respond. He caught the look on my face and frowned. "What?" She threw away the quilt. Nolan blinked. "What quilt? My grandmother's." "Oh, that old thing?" He waved a hand. "Babe, come on. The room looks incredible now. We should be grateful." Grateful. That was the word that always came up. Wasn't it I should be grateful to live in this house? Grateful he let me work. Grateful his mother was involved. Grateful for a marriage where every inch of space, every thread of identity, every decision was filtered through someone else's vision. Grateful to be invisible. "I'm tired," I said finally. He kissed my cheek. Long shift, I didn't answer. He didn't press. Later he fell asleep quickly as he always did. Peaceful. Unbothered. On a bed I didn't choose in a room I didn't recognize. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the quilt folded tightly against my chest like armor. My body ached. But not from the shift. It was the ache of something breaking and not knowing if it could be fixed. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up my face, casting shadows across the room. Dad's name stared back at me from the favorites list. I hadn't called him in months. Not really. A few short texts, a birthday voicemail. But not the kind of calls we used to have. The kind where I could tell him anything and he'd just listen until I unraveled myself into something whole again. My thumb hovered over the call button. Just one tap. That was all it would take. But I didn't press it. I didn't delete it either. Pediatric nursing. Nolan chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass like he was hosting a late-night comedy show. Callie just does basic bedside care. The words landed like a slap. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just quiet, dismissive, casual, like an afterthought tossed into the air for polite company to chuckle at and move on from. I felt the silence before I heard it. It stretched across the table like a held breath, long enough for every eye to flick toward me. Sharon Braxton, the wife of Nolan's managing partner, had asked me a question. A kind, sincere one. We'd been talking about kids, and I'd mentioned a few light stories from my work. Nothing attention-grabbing. Just enough to remind myself I had a life outside this house. A purpose. She leaned forward with genuine interest. Pediatric nursing must be incredibly hard but rewarding. You must have 100 stories. I smiled, unsure at first, then warming. It really is. We had a little girl last week, 5 years old, who was terrified of getting her IV, so I let her practice giving one to her stuffed rabbit. By the time it was her turn, she told me she was braver than her bunny. Sharon laughed, soft and maternal. That's so sweet. Honestly, the emotional side of medicine is just as important as the clinical part. I was about to nod to add something about how trust and comfort can affect healing outcomes, and then Nolan cut in. Callie's being modest, he said, smiling tightly. She just handles the basics. It's not like she's doing surgery or running a trauma unit. Mostly she keeps the kids entertained. The smile froze on my face. I felt it twitch at the corners. My body kept up the illusion, but my stomach dropped like the floor had opened beneath me. That's not entirely accurate, I said softly. There's a lot more to it. Nolan didn't even look at me. Sure, babe, but let's not get too technical. We don't want to bore our guests. He was laughing like this was just a fun little dinner story, like my entire career could be reduced to warm blankets and cartoons. I glanced at Sharon. Her brow had furrowed slightly. Her husband, Mr. Braxton, leaned forward, elbows resting on the tablecloth. Actually, Nolan pediatric nursing is no joke. My niece went into it. It takes emotional intelligence most people in this room probably couldn't fake for 5 minutes. He smiled at me, and something in his expression shifted. Genuine interest. Respect. I felt it like a wave, warm, foreign, startling. So tell us more, he said. What's the hardest part of your job? I blinked. No one had asked me that in years. Not at this table. Not in this house. I looked down at my plate, then up again. Honestly, it's earning the trust of kids who've been through things most adults couldn't handle, and trying to help their parents hold it together while staying calm myself. It's a balance. Sharon nodded, clearly moved. That must take incredible strength. Thank you, I said, trying not to choke on the words. I hadn't heard any of that from my husband or his family. Not once. For a moment, I forgot myself. Forgot to be small. I spoke about the hospital, about training in child psychology, about developing a pre-op support program that reduced sedation anxiety, and every word felt like reclaiming a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 3 years. Then I felt the heat. Nolan's glare, tight, controlled cold, cut into me like a scalpel. I knew that look. I'd gone too far. The rest of the dinner, blurred wine passed around, jokes told, plates cleared. Nolan put his arm around my shoulders and smiled, but his fingers dug into my skin like punishment dressed as affection. The performance continued, but the tension in his body told me everything. When the Braxtons finally stood to leave, Sharon hugged me lightly. Let me know if you ever want to speak at our Women in Health panel, she whispered. We'd love to hear more. I nodded, stunned. I'd love that. Mr. Braxton shook Nolan's hand, but his eyes landed on me again. You're doing real work, he said. That matters. Thank you, I managed. After the door closed behind them, Nolan was all smiles. Well, he said, clapping his hands once. That went great. Eloise was already sipping wine again in the living room. Dinner was lovely, dear, she called without turning her head. Kinsley had drifted toward the hallway, phone in hand. I headed to the kitchen to start stacking dishes, anything to keep my hands busy. That's when I heard it. From the other side of the archway, Eloise's voice low and unfiltered. She's always needed therapy. Honestly, no poise at all. Kinsley laughed lightly. It was awkward. She acted like she was being interviewed. Well, she was showing off. Eloise sniffed. It's tragic, really. She doesn't understand that tonight wasn't about her. I froze. Just for a moment. Then slowly, I set the plate in my hand into the sink. The clink of porcelain sounded louder than it should have. I straightened, staring out the window above the faucet, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing holding me upright. It wasn't the first time I'd heard them talk about me like that. But it was the first time I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel anger, not yet. What I felt was something deeper, heavier, like a door had just opened and behind it was every truth I hadn't wanted to face. I had shown a piece of myself tonight, just a piece. The part of me that still believed I mattered, and they couldn't stand it. You forgot your place. Nolan's voice sliced through the hallway like a blade, sharp and deliberate. He stood at the base of the stairs, tie-loosened, jaw-clenched eyes glittering with rage he didn't bother to hide anymore. I turned to face him. For once I didn't shrink. My place, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Please go ahead. Remind me what that is. He took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Your place is beside me. Not in front. Not grandstanding at dinner, not making the whole evening about you. Do you have any idea how you looked tonight? Like some insecure amateur clawing for attention. I was answering a question, I replied, arms crossed tightly over my chest. Sharon asked me directly. I didn't hijack anything. You embarrassed me, he snapped. You made me look weak in front of Braxton, like I couldn't keep my own wife in check. There it was. The word that always hovered just beneath the surface control. From the living room, Eloise's voice drifted out thick with whine and disdain. I told you she'd ruin it. Kinsley giggled, her laugh as hollow as her heart. She actually said sedation anxiety like she was giving a TED talk. Nolan ignored them, stepping in closer. His voice dropped low and venomous. Why couldn't you just smile and nod? Why is that so hard for you? I met his gaze, unblinking. Because I'm not invisible. He laughed bitterly. You're lucky to be standing next to a man like me. Do you think anyone else would put up with your moods, your delusions about being important? My hands curled into fists. My pulse roared in my ears. But I stayed calm. Finally. Calm, like someone who had nothing left to lose. 3 years, I said slowly. 3 years, I have swallowed every insult, every correction, every time your mother redecorated our house like I didn't exist. I gave up night shifts for you. I gave up holidays with my dad. I gave up myself. And tonight, I gave you 5 minutes of truth. 5 minutes of being proud of something I do every day. And that was too much for you. His face darkened. Don't play the victim, Callie. I'm not playing anything I snapped. I've been surviving, and I'm done. From the other room, Eloise rose from her seat. Oh, for heaven's sake! Here come the dramatics. This is why she never fit in. She needs help, Kinsley chimed in. Like actual therapy. It's like watching a Lifetime movie. Nolan reached out quick and angry, grabbing my arm. You think this is how you want to go out on a tantrum? I yanked my arm free, staring at him like I was seeing him for the first time. You really think I'm the problem? I whispered. That I'm unstable, difficult, ungrateful? But I'm not the one who belittles my partner in public. I'm not the one who treats a marriage like a contract. Callie. You hit me. The room went silent. You pushed me. You told me my work didn't matter. You let your mother throw away the last thing I had from my family. And I took it. I took all of it. Because I loved you. Because I thought if I tried hard enough, you'd remember how to love me back. Nolan stared at me, frozen. He looked like he wanted to speak but didn't know how to argue with the truth. And then his hand rose. Slow. Inevitable. But this time I didn't flinch. Go ahead, I said. Do it. Show them exactly who you are. That stopped him. Just for a second. But it wasn't enough. The slap landed hard. My head jerked sideways, my cheek exploding with pain, my eyes stinging from the force of it. For a moment, everything blurred. Then I heard it. Eloise's laughter, high, sharp, unbothered. Well, she said smugly. She asked for it. And then, a click. Kinsley was recording, smiling behind her phone like she was live streaming drama to her followers. That's when the front door opened. The sound was ordinary, just the latch, a sweep of air, but it stopped time. Heavy footsteps crossed the marble entryway. Measured. Certain. Nolan's hand, still hovering, slowly dropped. All three of them turned their heads. And there he was. My father. Colonel Thaddeus Maddox, framed in the archway like judgment carved in stone. He didn't speak. Not at first. Two men stood behind him, silent, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple black coats. Ex-military, you could tell in the way they held themselves. They didn't need to be armed. Their presence alone changed the air. My dad's eyes found mine instantly, then drifted to my cheek already blooming red, then to Nolan, whose hand still trembled at his side. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't rush. He walked into the living room with the calm of someone who had faced real enemies and now stood before the pettiest one yet. Eloise stumbled up from her chair. "Colonel Maddox. What a surprise this is, Callie," he said, ignoring her. His voice was calm, controlled, low enough to shake the walls. "Are you hurt?" I pressed a hand to my face. My throat felt like it might close. "I'm okay," I said, though I didn't believe it. "No," he said quietly. "You're not. But you will be." He turned to Nolan, not bothering with pleasantries. His expression didn't change, but I saw the fury simmering just beneath the surface. And when he spoke again, it chilled the room. "Gentlemen," he said to the men behind him, never taking his eyes off Nolan. "I believe we found our target." "Are you hurt?" Dad asks again, his voice low and steady, never leaving Nolan's face. I nod, my hand still pressed to my cheek. I'm not even sure if the tears gathering in my eyes are from the pain or the sheer weight of finally being seen. He nods once. "No." He says not as a question, but as a quiet correction. "You're not okay. But you will be." Nolan takes a step back, like he's only just now realizing that this moment isn't one he controls. "Colonel Maddox," he says quickly, nervously, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Callie and I had a disagreement, but it's a private." Dad raises a hand and Nolan shuts his mouth. "I don't want your version of the story, Nolan," Dad says. "I didn't come here to negotiate." "Then what did you come here for?" "Eloise," snaps, clutching her wineglass like a shield. "You can't just barge into our home with what, security guards?" "They're not guards," Dad replies calmly. "They're friends, veterans, people I trust with my life, and more importantly, my daughters." The two men remain silent, their presence filling the room like smoke. Nolan glances at them, then back at my father as if trying to calculate his odds and realizing they aren't good. Dad steps farther into the room, dropping a manila folder onto the coffee table with a quiet thwap. It fans open slightly, just enough for the first photo to peek through. My face. From 2 months ago, bruised. My breath catches. I didn't know he had that photo. I didn't know anyone saw. "I've been watching," Dad says. "Longer than you think." Nolan tries again. "Look, I know how this looks. I don't care how it looks." Dad cuts in sharp now. "I care about what it is. I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter stopped calling me. When she missed Sunday brunch 3 weeks in a row. When she made excuses on holidays. When her texts got shorter and her voice sounded smaller. I can't breathe, but I can't look away either. I spent 30 years in the military," he continues, pacing slowly. "You learn to read silence just as clearly as words. So I hired a private investigator 3 months ago. I didn't want to believe what I suspected, but I needed the truth." He gestures toward the folder. "And I got it." Nolan looks down at the folder like it's radioactive. "There's a detailed timeline in there," Dad says evenly. "Medical records, screenshots, voice recordings, financial statements showing exactly how you've isolated her, cut off access, redirected funds, tracked her movement, and more than a dozen photos from different points in time. Some from neighbors, some from traffic cameras, some from the hospital parking lot. You didn't cover your tracks nearly as well as you thought." Kinsley mutters something under her breath and slinks back a step, trying to disappear behind the couch. Eloise starts to speak, but Dad cuts her off with a look that silences the entire room. I sent copies to Nolan's firm this morning, he adds, directly to Mr. Braxton. Nolan blanches. You, what I figured Dad says, if you were going to bring your boss to dinner, he deserved to know the kind of man he's promoting. You had no right. I had every right, Dad growls, suddenly fierce. You put your hands on my daughter. That forfeits any right you think you had. Nolan opens his mouth, then closes it. For once, he has no script. I met with Mr. Braxton at 2 p.m. today. Dad continues. Told him everything, showed him the evidence. He was disturbed, deeply. His exact words were, "We don't elevate abusers. You're being placed on immediate suspension, pending internal investigation, and based on what I shared, I doubt you'll see the inside of that office again." Eloise gasps, her wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the tile. "You can't do this," she says, panicked. "You're ruining his career." "No," Dad says, voice like stone. "He ruined his career. I'm just making sure it doesn't go unnoticed." "But this is family," she shrieks. "You don't destroy family over a domestic spat." Dad turns on her with a coldness I've never seen before. "You watched my daughter get slapped across the face and laughed. You've berated her for years. You raised a son who thinks dominance is love. And you want to talk about family." Eloise opens her mouth, then closes it. Her face twists, but no words come. Dad looks at me again. His face softens. "I couldn't sit by anymore, sweetheart. I had to act." I swallow the lump in my throat. "You knew." He nods. "You didn't have to tell me. I could hear it in your silence." He turns to Nolan, his expression hardening again. "You're done," he says, final and flat. "Not just with the firm. With her. With everything you used to control. The show is over." Nolan backs away, his voice barely a whisper. "You can't just take her." "I'm not taking her," Dad says. "She's choosing to leave." He looks at me. "Aren't you?" I nod. And for the first time in years, my voice doesn't shake. "Yes," I say. "I am." Dad takes a deep breath and reaches into his coat, pulling out a small velvet pouch. "By the way," he says, holding it out, "I brought this." I open it slowly. My grandmother's quilt. Clean, folded, whole. "How did you—" "I had someone watching the house," he says. "Your husband's not the only one who can prepare for war." Nolan sags into a chair, pale defeated. Colonel Maddox turns to the men behind him and gives a single nod. "Let's get her out of here." "You can't just leave," Eloise hissed, stumbling after me as I walked toward the stairs. "We're family." I stopped mid-step, turning slowly to face her. "No," I said, voice calm. "You're not. You're people who tolerated my presence while I bent myself into pieces to fit your world." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "You're being dramatic." "I've been silent for 3 years," I said, letting myself be erased one piece at a time. If I'd spoken up, then maybe it wouldn't have come to this. But let me be clear, this isn't drama. This is clarity. Nolan stood frozen by the fireplace, jaw-clenched eyes darting between me and my father, who still stood like a pillar in the room, unmoving, commanding. The folder with his crimes lay open on the coffee table, and it felt like the whole house was holding its breath around it. I turned to him next. "I loved who I thought you were," I said, the weight of the truth rolling off my shoulders with every word. "But that man never existed. You were always this controlling, cruel, more concerned with how things looked than how they felt." I ignored the signs. I excused the cuts, the bruises, the quiet heartbreak. I thought if I could just be good enough, you'd love me back. He swallowed hard but didn't speak. I stayed because I believed in the vows we made. I stayed because I wanted to build something, but all I was building was a cage. I turned to Eloise again, who stood with her arms folded tightly over her chest, like she could hold in the truth through sheer willpower. "You didn't raise a man," I said. "You raised a monster in a suit." Her mouth opened in protest, but nothing came out. "You dressed it up in manners and money and let it grow. You looked away while he controlled me. You laughed when he humiliated me. You enabled him and called it loyalty. You told yourself it was love." Eloise's hands dropped to her sides, shaking slightly. Kinsley was nowhere to be seen. She'd slipped out the second things turned uncomfortable, always the spectator, never the witness. I stepped past Eloise and moved up the stairs to our bedroom, their bedroom now. I pulled out the suitcase I hadn't touched in years and opened my closet, packing methodically. I didn't want their things. I didn't want anything bought with their money or chosen for their aesthetic. I wanted my clothes, my certifications, my journals, my life. When I reached the nightstand, I pulled open the drawer and found the little tin box that held my nursing school pin and my first patient's thank you card. I tucked it gently into the side pocket of my suitcase. My fingers brushed the edge of the velvet pouch my father had given me downstairs. The quilt. I spread it out just for a moment, soft, familiar, worn in all the right ways. The robin patch stared up at me like a reminder you come from survivors. Women who made warmth out of scraps and safety out of thread. When I came back down with my suitcase in hand, Dad was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He reached out and took it from me without a word. I let him. Nolan stepped forward, eyes wild now, desperation creeping into his voice. "Callie, wait. Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll change. I'll get help, I swear." I tilted my head. "You had 3 years to change. You had 100 chances to listen, to see me, to stop hurting me. But you didn't want to change. You wanted control. Please," he said softer now. "I still love you." I gave a small, sad smile. "If this is what you call love, Nolan, then you never knew what love was." I turned to leave, but my father stepped forward, pausing beside Nolan. His voice was measured, steady. "You raised your hand to my daughter," he said, "and now she's raising herself without you." Nolan said nothing. He stood there trembling, his empire crumbling around him. Eloise reached out as I passed her. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. I looked her dead in the eye. "No, I'm correcting one." Dad held the front door open, and I walked through it with the quilt wrapped around my shoulders like armor. The air outside was cool, the stars sharp and bright against the night sky. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs like it was the first time I'd truly breathed in years. As we reached the car, Dad opened the back hatch and gently placed my suitcase inside. Then he turned to me, holding out the quilt again, folding it with military precision and reverence. "No one," he said, "throws away my daughter's history." My eyes stung again, but I let the tears fall this time. Not because I was broken, but because something inside me had finally been released. I looked back at the house, the tall windows, the curated decor, the people inside who had spent years convincing me I didn't belong anywhere else. They were wrong. I didn't just escape that night. I reclaimed myself. "Nurse Maddox, room 314 needs you." The voice came from the hallway, a little boy no older than 6 peeking out from his hospital bed with a plastic dinosaur clutched in one hand and a juice box in the other. I smiled, stepping into his room. "Well, hello, Dr. Dino. How's your patient today?" "He's grumpy," the boy said gravely. "He doesn't like his IV." "Me neither," I whispered conspiratorially, crouching beside him. "But do you know what makes it easier? What Cape energy?" He narrowed his eyes. "Is that real?" "Very," I said. "Cape energy is when you're scared but do the brave thing anyway. It's what superheroes use before every big mission." He grinned. "I think I have some." "I know you do." This was my life now, steady, clear mine. No more shrinking, no more silence. No more dressing rooms where I wondered if a blouse was aspirational enough. I wore hospital scrubs with cartoon animals and a name badge that said supervisor. It had taken months of paperwork, training, and late nights. But last week, the hospital board had approved my proposal to implement a family resilience program in the pediatric wing. Trauma-informed care parent coaching. Safe discharge planning. Everything I wished someone had given me when I'd felt trapped in my own home. I hung the child's new IV bag, then headed back toward the nurse's station. On my desk was a crayon drawing a caped stick figure beside a smiling dinosaur. At the top, in large, uneven letters, it read, "My nurse is a superhero." I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because this time I knew I'd earned every inch of that cape. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Dad Braxton just announced the firm is terminating Nolan officially. Lawsuit incoming. Rumor is half his clients have left. Another message followed right after. Dad Country Club dropped Eloise. Some board members' wives saw the photos. Apparently we don't support abusers or enablers. I stared at the texts not with glee but with a quiet, satisfied exhale. Consequences. Not revenge. Just balance returning. Another buzz. This one from an unfamiliar email address. From Isabel Brennan. Subject. I don't expect a response, but I needed to say this. Callie. I know I have no right to reach out to you. I don't expect forgiveness, and I wouldn't blame you if you delete this without reading. But I needed to say that I'm sorry. I watched my brother belittle you for years, and I laughed. I filmed your pain. I stood beside my mother while she tore you down, and I said nothing. And I've had to live with the fact that I became the kind of woman I used to swear I'd never be cruel by association. My engagement ended when the video surfaced. I lost friends. I lost my job. At first I blamed you. Then I realized the truth. I helped make your life a prison, and you walked out of it stronger than I ever could have imagined. I've been in therapy. I'm trying to unlearn what I was raised to believe about love, power, and image. And watching your strength, it's what pushed me to finally look at myself. You didn't deserve any of it. And I'm so sorry. Belle. I read it twice, then a third time. The girl who once mocked me over salad forks and lipstick had written me something raw, honest, and deeply uncomfortable. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't feel compelled to respond. I didn't want to rekindle anything from that part of my life. But I didn't delete it. I moved it to a folder labeled Closure and closed the email app. Some people grow, others rot. And me, I wasn't stuck anymore. Later that evening, I stepped outside the hospital into golden dusk. The sky looked like watercolor, brilliant streaks of pink and orange stretching across the horizon. The air smelled like rain had just passed through, clean and fresh, like everything had been reset. Dad's car pulled up to the curb. He rolled down the window. Aviators perched on his nose, the quilt neatly folded on the passenger seat beside him, like it had its own place of honor. "Dinner," he called out. "Only if it's somewhere that doesn't have folded napkins," I replied, grinning. He laughed. "No forks required, just burgers and freedom." I slid into the passenger seat and looked at the quilt again. The robin patch was still visible, a symbol stitched from survival and history. I kept it with me every night, I told him. "I figured," he said, "that thing has more miles on it than most soldiers I know." As we pulled away from the hospital, I glanced at my phone one more time. A final message had come in. Sharon Braxton. "Are you still interested in speaking at the Women in Health Leadership Summit? We'd be honored to have someone like you share your story." I smiled, not because I wanted recognition, but because this invitation was proof of how far I'd come. I had been buried, belittled, erased, and now I was being asked to stand at a podium and speak. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's disappointment, but as Callie Maddox. And this time every word would be mine. No white aisle, no groom. Just me, a promise ring, and a garden full of people who love me. The air smelled like jasmine and lemon zest. Late spring in Virginia had painted the world in watercolor pale lavender, blooms lining the stone path, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and a string quartet tuning in the distance, not for tradition, but because I loved the sound of cello at dusk. I wore a dress I picked out with no one's opinion but my own. It wasn't white. It wasn't even designer. Just pale yellow cotton with embroidered flowers along the hem, soft and feminine, like the kind of joy I never used to let myself want. There were 50 chairs arranged in the garden behind the community center, each one filled with a face that had lifted me back up fellow nurses, a few old friends from college women I met in group therapy, hospital staff, and even 2 mothers of my past pediatric patients. Each one was a witness to the woman I had become. At the front stood my father, flanked by a homemade trellis wrapped in string lights and wildflowers. He wasn't in dress blues today, just a charcoal gray suit and a yellow tie to match my dress. But the way he looked at me, steady, proud mist in his eyes, was more powerful than any formal salute. I stepped up to the microphone in flat shoes and a steady heartbeat. "This isn't a wedding." I began smiling. Not in the traditional sense. There's no groom, no legal document, no borrowed heirlooms. This is something different, something overdue. A few people chuckled softly. Others nodded, quiet tears already forming. "This is a promise," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "A vow to myself. To never shrink again. To never confuse control with love, silence with peace, or approval with belonging." I held up the ring, simple rose gold with a small engraving on the inside hole on my own. "I promise," I said, slipping it onto my own finger, to never abandon myself again. "I promise to speak even when my voice shakes. To walk away from tables where love is conditional. And to hold space for myself and for anyone who's ever believed they had to disappear to be loved." There was silence. Then thunderous applause. Later, as the string quartet played something soft and joyful, I walked through the garden with my arms full of sunflowers, taking pictures with my guests, accepting warm hugs and quiet blessings. My father found me near the lemonade table, holding 2 slices of almond cake. "Best wedding I've ever been to," he said, handing me a plate. I laughed. "You're biased," maybe he said. But I've never been prouder to stand beside a bride. We sat on a bench near the fountain, listening to laughter ripple through the garden. "You ever think about what you would have said? I asked if you had given me away?" He looked off toward the trellis for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "I would have told you that you don't need anyone's permission to be powerful. That a woman who knows her worth is the scariest thing small men will ever face." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "You would have made them all cry." "Good." He chuckled. "They deserved it." In the months after I walked out of Nolan's house, I found pieces of myself scattered in places I'd forgotten to look. I started a support circle at the hospital, a private after-hours gathering for nurses dealing with domestic violence at home. The first session, only 2 women came. Now it's 15 and growing. We don't just share stories, we build plans, resources, safe exits. One woman called it emotional triage. Another called it life-saving. I call it a beginning. That night, after the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, I sat in my apartment by the window, the garden bouquet on my windowsill, and the soft echo of cello still in my ears. I opened my journal and began to write. Not a diary entry. A letter. Dear me, the version of me who stayed, who kept quiet, who let love become a leash. I see you. You were just trying to survive, to make it work, to turn bruises into balance and insults into explanations. But you can't save someone by disappearing. You save the world by saving yourself first. That's how the healing starts. That's how you break cycles. I'm not angry with you. I'm proud of you. Because even at your lowest, you never let the light go out completely. You kept a sliver of yourself safe until you were strong enough to let it grow. That sliver is who I am now. Whole, loud, bright, and completely free. I signed it with my full name, Callie Elise Maddox. Then I folded it, tucked it into the back of my journal, and placed the journal under my pillow. The ring on my finger caught the moonlight just enough to glow. No man had placed it there. I had. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. Callie's story reminds us that strength isn't always loud, it's often the quiet decision to walk away, to rebuild, to rise without permission. If her journey moved, you share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment, and your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, healing, and self-worth. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Served Cold. We'll see you next time.